welcome back in. Today we're discussing my top 30 running backs for the 2025 season. We put these in tiers. Training camp's only about a month away, so I figured this would be a good time to start, getting some of this information together prior to training camp and preseason. Once we start getting a lot more information, especially when it comes to the rookie running backs, it's going to be a pivotal role on where these guys go and who you want to draft and when you want to draft them. Now, speaking of that, I will say I think going with an anchor RB approach is going to be the way this year. I wouldn't try to adjust to what happened last year. We saw really kind of a crazy year where really virtually very few running backs got hurt, and it really helped drafting running backs early. And it was kind of the key to winning, last year because of so many wide receivers getting hurt last year. I think the anchor RB is going to be the way. I want to draft running back at the first two tiers that I have here. So let's go ahead and get into it. First up, let's do the first tier. We're going to start with a number one tier. This is kind of the elite running back round one options for me. And it's going to be Bijan Robinson, Jameer Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Ashton Genty, and Derrick Henry. And when you look at this for me, it's going to be Bijan Robinson is my favorite running back right now as the RB1 this year. He ranked top 5 in carries, targets, and red zone touches. Currently, he's coming off the board, according to Fantasy Pros ADP, as the RB1, and I have no problem with that. We kind of saw last year from weeks 1 through 5, he averaged 13 and a half fantasy points per game. But from week 6 through 18, he was the RB2, averaging 23 fantasy points per game. He finished with 1,400 rushing yards and 400 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns. What I love about Bijan is he's heavily involved in the passing game. He's going to be the guy at the goal line. Yes, they still have Tyler Algier, but Bijan Robinson is running behind one of the best offensive lines in the league. And this offense should be better in year 2 with Michael Penix. So he is my RB1 overall this year. Next up is going to be Jameer Gibbs. He's coming off the board, 6th overall RB3. He finished as the RB1. He did so with just handling 53% of the opportunities. He went absolutely nuclear in weeks 14 through 18, scoring 30 fantasy points per game. He ended up rushing for 1,400 yards, 517 receiving yards, and 20 touchdowns while averaging 21.3 fantasy points per game. He was one of the most explosive running backs and efficient running backs in the league last year, finishing second in yards per touch, second explosive run rate, 8th in yards created per touch. David Montgomery is still going to be involved this season, but Gibbs has proven that he can be a big-time scorer even with Monty involved. I wouldn't be surprised this year if we see a little bit of a jump in terms of opportunity share that he sees for handling 53% of the opportunities. I definitely think you can see him jump up to maybe a 60, 65%. He's never going to be a guy that's going to be, top 10, top 5 in opportunity share. I don't think that's ever going to happen with Gibbs, but I do think that we could see a bump for him, which is only going to be better for him. So I really like Jameer Gibbs. And then next up is going to be Saquon Barkley, who's coming off the board 4th overall, RB2. Now, I have Barkley third as my RB3 right now. Now, despite Barkley putting up a monster season, rushing for 2,000 yards, 278 receiving yards, and 15 touchdowns, and averaging 22.2 fantasy points per game, which was number 1 among all running backs last year. What concerns me, though, is the sheer volume that he saw last year. 482 total touches last year, including the playoffs, really, really worries me. And historically, running backs with this high of touch share, finishing as the RB1, tend to not repeat. And it's not even just repeating as the RB1. Only one running back since 2015 has finished, who finishes the RB1, finishes a top 5 running back again the following season, and that was Ezekiel Elliott. And these running backs from 2015, 2024, they average RB11, the following year. And so I think there's some concern here with Saquon Barkley. I'm not saying that just stay away from him, but there's definitely a little bit of concern here, especially with his injury history in the past, that with all the touches that he saw last year could end up bothering him a little bit this year. So that is certainly something to keep in mind. Next up is going to be Ashton Genty, who's coming off the board 9th overall, RB4. I know there's going to be some pushback because he's a rookie. We've never seen it before, but I think everything aligns for him to be a stud right out of the gate. There's very little in the way of only Raheem Mostert, who they brought in, who's just turned 33 years old. And the Raiders also, have added to their offensive line, signing Alex Kappa and then 2 third-round picks and Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant. But, with Pete Carroll coming over, this is going to be a run-heavy offense. And I think Ashton Genty is just going to get all the opportunity, all the touches from this backfield. So I just think it's really hard for me to see where he doesn't finish as a top 5, top 6 running back this year. There's recent examples. If you look at Bijan Robinson, that people may bring up, who didn't, have a great first year, or at least what people expected according to ADP. But we have to remember that was Arthur Smith, who we all know Arthur Smith does Arthur Smith things. And then you also had Tyler Algier there to handle, and take touches away from him. I don't see that at all in any way, shape, or form with Ashton Genty. So next up is going to be Derrick Henry, who's last of this tier for me, and he is 13th overall RB6. And despite him closing in on 32 years old, there shows no signs of slowing down for Derrick Henry. He's just an ageless wonder. 1,900 yards, 18 touchdowns last year. His efficiency metrics were great. First in explosive run rate, sixth in missed tackles forced per attempt, and third in yards per touch. Well, he's always have a cap ceiling because he's not ever involved in the passing game. He finishes the RB4 last year in fantasy points per game until Father Time catches up to him. And I don't know when that's going to happen. That is the one thing that would always hold me back from drafting or worry me about drafting Derrick Henry as he gets older and older is the Father Time scenario catching up to him. But he's shown no signs whatsoever of that being the case. So I'm perfectly okay with taking him at cost. Now let's move over to tier two. And in this tier for me, it's going to be Devon Achane, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, Bucky Irving, Christian McCaffrey, and Kenneth Walker. First, let's talk about Devon Achane, who's RB7, 16th overall. I really almost put him in this tier one group for me because I think as long as Tua Tagovailoa stays healthy, I think we're in for a monster season for Devon Achane. In 13 games last year with Tua, he was the RB2, tied with Saquon Barkley, scoring 272 fantasy points. And in those 13 games, he was a top 10 scorer in 9 of those weeks. In the other 4 games without Tua, though, he scored just 7 fantasy points per game. On the season, he finished with 907 rushing yards, 592 receiving yards, and 12 touchdowns. He finishes the RB6. Now, he's not really heavily involved in the run game, or he's not as involved in the run game. Only 11.9 carries per game last year, but his 87 targets were the second most among all running backs. So PPR formats, I just think Devon Achane makes a ton of sense. And if Tua can stay healthy, which is a big if he can, I think it's a monster season, wheels up for Devon Achane. So next up for me, Chase Brown, RB11, 29th overall. One of the biggest winners of the offseason after a career year. He finished 2024 with 1,400 total yards, 11 touchdowns, 15.9 fantasy points per game. Now, the first half of the season, he split touches with Zach Moss. But once Moss went down from week 9 on, he averaged 20 fantasy points per game. Heading into 2025, not much has changed. They drafted Taj Brooks in the 6th round, who's probably more of a pass catching option if he sees touches. And then Samaje Perine, they brought him back. So, all things considered, he should definitely be the workhorse again for the entirety of this season. And then you have to factor in that he's going to be involved in the passing game because Joe Burrow is top 5 every year, checking down to his running backs. And then this defense is going to be dreadful again for this year for the Bengals. So I expect this team to have to throw the ball a lot and have to put up a lot of points. And that's all going to benefit Chase Brown. So RB11, 29th overall, getting him in the 3rd round, I think is a steal. So really like Chase Brown. Bucky Irving, RB10, was one of the top value picks last season. Just like Chase Brown, he was drafted in the later rounds. He finished last season with 1,100 rushing yards, 392 receiving yards, as well as 8 touchdowns, 14.4 fantasy points per game. Efficiency standpoint, he was phenomenal, finishing top 5 in yards per touch, missed tackles forced per attempt, and explosive run rate and yards created per touch. He did all this while seeing just 12 carries per game and 3.1 targets per game. In 2025, I think he takes a bigger step forward and takes a bigger pie of this backfield away from Rachaad White, who we know Rachaad White's just not very good. And so I really like Bucky Irving as another option here in the 3rd round of drafts. He's going right around the beginning of the 3rd round. So, and then Christian McCaffrey is another guy I want to talk about in this tier. RB5, 11th overall. I was actually surprised in ADP from Fantasy Pros that he's already going in the 1st round. I was not expect. I thought he was going to be like a back half of the 2nd round type pick because of the injuries coming off of. For me, he's kind of one of the harder players to rank because I definitely think the upside is still there intact for him, but injury concerns are also 100% in play, especially now that he's 29 years old. Obviously, he missed most of all of last year, dealing with various injuries. But this is very much a home run swing for me. It could pay off in a big way. There is a lot more concern if you're going to be taking him in the 1st round versus if he was going to go in like the back half of the 2nd round. If I'm going to draft Christian McCaffrey, I'm going to have to draft Isaac Guerendo. And I'm not a guy that is a big handcuff type guy. I think that's actually the wrong way to do it. But with Christian McCaffrey, I have to get the backup here because I'm just more concerned with the injuries and everything else with him. Again, he stays healthy. Sky's the limit for him. But if he doesn't, I definitely need a backup option here. And Isaac Guerendo, we've seen who has played. Jordan Mason is gone. It would definitely be Isaac Guerendo, but we know what his upside could be. So I would have to handcuff Christian McCaffrey if I'm going to take him. Let's move over to the next tier. And this is tier 3 for me. This tier is going to be Kyron Williams, Alvin Kamara, Brees Hall, James Cook, and Chuba Hubbard. First up is going to be Kyron Williams, RB12, 31st overall. While overall his season was fine last year, rushing for 1,300 yards, 182 receiving yards, and 16 touchdowns. He finishes the RB10 in fantasy points per game. However, he was one of the most inefficient running backs in the league. Finished 52nd yards created per touch, 40th in explosive run rate, and a putrid 2.78 yards per touch. Moreover, he only had an RB week 5 times last year, despite him scoring 16 touchdowns. He was much more of a high floor play than he was a ceiling play on most weeks. And then this year, after last year drafting Blake Corum in 2024, they came back again this year and drafted Jarquez Hunter. Now, Blake Corum was not, pretty much a non-factor. That was kind of one of the big talking points of last season. But I still will say that if they decide to give one of these two running backs a little bit more opportunity from Kyron Williams, because Kyron Williams had a fumbling issue last year and just being overall inefficient, then that could definitely be a problem, because I view Kyron Williams much more as a volume monster than anything else. And if he loses some of that volume, it could be a big problem for Kyron Williams. So that is definitely something to take into consideration if you're thinking about drafting Kyron. Next up is going to be Alvin Kamara, who right now I think is one of the better values, especially in PPR formats. RB16, 51st overall. Now I get it; he's about to be 30 years old, and this offense is probably not going to be very good last year. Let's face it, the offense wasn't very good last year either, and he still posted 19 fantasy points per game, which was good for RB5 last year. The majority of his production comes from the passing game, where he had a ridiculous 21% target share. He was also second in route participation, led all running backs in targets. As long as his role in the passing game doesn't change, he still should be viewed as a high end RB2 or even a low end RB1, even with the current quarterback situation that they have there. So next up, let's move over to James Cook, RB14, 40th overall in ADP right now. He's averaging nearly 17 fantasy points per game, largely because of his 18 touchdowns that he scored last year. He wasn't involved at all in the passing game, which is a little bit discouraging because in the previous years he was, but he only saw 2.5 targets per game, which is definitely going to limit his ceiling and make him a little bit more touchdown dependent if his pass catching work doesn't come back. And he's also threatened to hold out if he doesn't see a contract extension. So I just think there's a little bit more, especially at current cost. If he's going to be going in like the third round, I'm a little bit less excited to take James Cook than I have been. And I've been a big James Cook guy the last couple of years, really advocating for him. But I think touchdowns on a year-to-year basis are a little bit fluky. 2 years ago, he didn't score a ton, and that was one of the things that everybody was holding against them. Everyone thought Ray Davis was going to take that role. Obviously, it didn't happen. But with Josh Allen there and his ability to run the ball, especially down as you get down at the goal line, there's always some concern there with James Cook. And if he's not going to be involved in the passing game, it makes me a little less inclined to take someone like James Cook. And maybe you'd rather take somebody that's going a little bit later than he is. And that's Chuba Hubbard, who's coming off the board at RB18 or 53rd overall. Hubbard was a steal last year, was a workhorse back who most drafted as a late round flyer. He finished with 16.1 fantasy points per game on 17 carries and a strong 12% target share. He's also running behind one of the best offensive lines in the league. And heading into 2025, Dave Canales, and especially when it comes to running backs, we've seen him be able to produce running backs in his scheme. We saw it with Rashad White. We saw it with Chuba Hubbard last year. Now, there is some concern. We kind of get this guy that kind of comes out of nowhere every year. Everybody jumps on board. And then all of a sudden, he goes much higher than what he did the year prior. And then he falls on his face. I'm not as worried about that when it comes to Chuba this year, just because of all the situation that's here. Miles Sanders is gone, but then they brought in Rico Dowdle, who is a capable running back. I don't think he's going to take away a ton of touches from Chuba. And I just think this overall is Panthers offense. I think it's going to be a little bit sneaky in terms of value that you can pull from this offense this year. So I think Bryce Young, I don't think it's a fluke what we saw in the second half of the year last year. So Chuba Hubbard, I actually really like at cost. Now let's move over to tier 4, and that is going to be a little bit more of the rookie running backs with Quinshon Judkins, James Conner, DeAndre Swift, Joe Mixon, Omarion Hampton, David Montgomery, and Aaron Jones. Now, first up, I do want to talk about the rookie running backs here, and I'm going to talk about Quinshon Judkins, RB24, 73rd overall. I just spoke about him in my last video as a muck draft running back, and that still holds true now. I love Judkins this year, and I'm actually surprised how much ahead Omarion Hampton is going than Judkins. I mean, I love Omarion Hampton, and I definitely think he's probably the second best running back in this draft class this year. But he's going to have to contend with Najee Harris for touches. I don't think Najee's going away. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is a little bit more of a 50-50 split, especially right out the gate. And if that's going to be the case, like, how are you going to draft Omarion Hampton 49th overall? Because right there at that, I think you're definitely missing out on something if you're going to take him there. And why not just take Judkins, who's going 73rd overall, almost 30 picks later than Judkins is? it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for that. And if you look at Junkins' situation, I mean, it's Jerome Ford there, and then fourth round pick Dylan Sampson. Like, and I get it. Maybe a lot of people don't really love the Browns offense, and I understand that. But I just think Junkins is a phenomenal player. I think he is going to get all the opportunity to be the early down back, very much maybe like Nick Chubb did. Maybe he's not as involved in the passing game, but at 73rd overall, I would much rather just wait and just take someone like him than taking Amari Hampton, who's going much higher, 20 some picks, later, so or 21 picks earlier. So let's keep it moving here. Let's talk about James Conner, RB 21. 59th overall, never really gets any respect. But Connor surprisingly played the most games last season as he has his entire career. He finished RB 15 in fantasy points per game, nearly 1,100 rushing yards, 414 receiving yards on 47 receptions and 9 touchdowns. Heading into 2025, not much has changed with this offense, and Drew Petzing does well at one thing, and that is his rushing attack scheme. So I don't mind James Conner. Yes, he's 30 years old. He's more of a risky pick because of his age and his injury history, but I think he's fine at cost as long as he stays healthy, and he's a really strong RB2 option here, going around the sixth round right now. So I don't mind James Conner at all. Next up is going to be DeAndre Swift, and his ADP really surprised me. RB 28, 81st overall. While many thought the Bears would add another running back this offseason, that didn't happen. Swift, while he is a risky RB2 option, last season he was seventh in opportunity share, but only averaged 12.6 fantasy points per game and was 21st among all running backs. Now, Ben Johnson's in town. It's probably possible his role shifts to more what it was whenever he was in Detroit. Because if you have to remember, Ben Johnson was the offensive coordinator when DeAndre Swift was there, and he was much more of a change of pace back. And if you remember, Jamal Williams was the one that was getting all the short yardage and goal line work there in that system. And so it does worry me when it comes to DeAndre Swift. Like, I don't mind him at that cost if that's where he's going to go at RB 28, 81st overall. He's going off the board as an RB3. And so I don't mind that. But I do think Roshan Johnson is a very interesting value pick that you can get later in your draft, because I do think there's a scenario here where that's the role that he plays, the short yardage, goal line back, change of pace type back. And so if that's the case, I mean, I'm not saying he's going to go out and score 20 touchdowns like Jamal Williams did, but I definitely think that, wouldn't surprise me if Roshan Johnson has a good year. And I will say this, the Bears went out and spent a ton of capital on their offensive line this offseason, really trying to revamp that for Caleb Williams. So I actually think this Bears offense is going to be much better. The rushing attack should be better than what it was now with this much better offensive line. Really don't mind taking a shot on DeAndre Swift as long as his ADP doesn't get higher. Lastly, Joe Mixon, RB19, 55th overall. Despite finishes the RB9 fantasy points per game, it was really a tale of two halves. The first 8 weeks, he averaged 22 and a half fantasy points per game, but then he suffered a steep decline, averaging just 9 fantasy points per game over the final 6 weeks. More competition that he's going to have this year now that they added Nick Chubb. They also drafted Woody Marks, who they really like. Offensive line might be even worse than it was last year. So I think there's some concerns here when it comes to Joe Mixon now with all the added competition, because that's what everybody loved about Joe Mixon last year, was that opportunity that he was going to have because there was nobody else there to take touches away from him. This year, it's not really the case. So I'm not nearly as high on Joe Mixon. And, RB 19, 55 overall isn't terrible, but I just think there's a lot of red flags when it comes to Joe Mixon this year. And lastly, this is kind of my flex RB3 type guys. It's going to be Tony Pollard, RJ Harvey, Caleb Johnson, Isaiah Pacheco, Travion Henderson, Brian Robinson. I could put a lot of different running backs here. I kind of went back and forth on who I really wanted to have here. Let's just start with Tony Pollard. He's somebody that I actually really thought about making as an RB2, because I actually think he's in a pretty good spot this year. I know last year he still only averaged about 12 fantasy points per game, despite really dominating the touches in that backfield. He had over 70% of the opportunities. But with Tony Pollard, we have to remember that offensive line, the offense, everything was terrible there in the last year. I do think this offense should be better this year. Adding Cam Ward, they improved the offensive line. And so I do think Tony Pollard is definitely somebody, especially at cost of where he's being drafted, RB27, 76th overall. I think he's a pretty nice spot here. I think he's definitely worth a look here, because I think he's being a little bit slept on right now. And then you have the rookie running backs, RJ Harvey, Caleb Johnson, and Travion Henderson. There's some other rookie running backs we're definitely going to be talking about. And this is why training camp information is going to be so vital, because somebody like RJ Harvey, just a couple of weeks ago, was thought as a guy who's like a locked in RB2 this year there in Denver. But they go out and bring in J.K. Dobbins, who proved last year that he still has something in the tank. And so it definitely lowered my excitement a little bit on RJ Harvey. I want to see how things play out for him. Same thing you could say for someone like Travion Henderson, who has Ramondre Stevenson there. And Mike Vrabel came out and said, Ramondre Stevens is going to have a big role in this offense again this year. So it's going to be dependent on how much work Travion Henderson has. I think he's going to be much more of a pass catching type option. So PPR formats, I think that makes him a little bit more interesting. And then Caleb Johnson is also another player here, obviously with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now with Najee Harris gone, I think he slides right into that role. I think Jalen Warren is going to be the change of pace option here. And so I do think Caleb Johnson is kind of interesting as well, as a little bit more of a later round pick. Somebody that's probably going to go eighth, ninth, 10th round, somewhere right around there. If that's where he holds, I really like that spot for him. Yes, this offense might not be exciting, even if they added Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf. But, this team is going to want to run the ball. That's just what Arthur Smith does. And I wouldn't be surprised if, Caleb Johnson could rush for maybe a low end, 1,000 yards this year and, score 7 to 8, maybe 9 touchdowns this year. So I think he is in a very good spot. Somebody that I definitely have interest in my drafts. And then get someone like Isaiah Pacheco. Didn't really know what to do with them. They have so many options here this year. I don't really know how this is going to shake out for Isaiah Pacheco. Kareem Hunt is back. They signed Elijah Mitchell. They also went out and drafted Rashad Smith, who's been getting a lot of buzz in training camp, and how much they're utilizing him in the passing game. Very much could be a Jerick McKinnon type situation for him. And so Isaiah Pacheco, I think, is just a little bit more risky this season. So as long as he doesn't get crazy in ADP, I don't mind taking him as like an RB3 option, but I wouldn't want to take him any higher than that. And then someone like Brian Robinson, who I actually was surprised again that they didn't draft, especially how loaded this running back class was this year, that they didn't take a running back. And so he's kind of a low key winner. I'm not overly excited about him. He really wasn't great, especially towards the back half of last season. Wasn't great. I don't know if he was dealing with some sort of injuries. I definitely think, again, RB3, RB4, don't mind taking some shots on him in terms of, upside and stuff like that. But past that, there's gonna be a lot of debate around guys like Cam Scatabo and the Tyron Tracy situation, and guys like Javonte Williams, Bashaw Tootin has drawn a lot of buzz there for Jacksonville. Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, what's going to happen there? There's all the stuff that we're going to have to figure out, over the next month and month and a half until the season starts. And so a lot of information that we're going to have to go over. But this is my initial top 30. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.